So it does seem like we're getting pretty mixed messages and mixed signals from Saudi Arabia. On the one hand, people think they're edging closer to joining the Abraham Accords with Israel. And on the other hand, people are saying, well, they still seem to be pretty hostile to Israel, still unsure about their relationship with anti-Israel, anti-Western countries, sympathetic to Islamist point of views. And Netanyahu, in a recent press conference just now, spoke about this. He's decided to confront this head on, pretty far-reaching press conference. And he said that if the Saudis want a deal, we expect them not to align with anti-Israel forces, as the Saudi Arabian crown prince kind of seems to be doing, where he's cozying up to Turkey and Qatar and turning away from the UAE. So let's read what was said in a summary in the Times of Israel, saying as follows, that in the latest sign that a normalization deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia is not going to be signed anytime in the foreseeable future, Prime Minister Netanyahu said on Tuesday he's closely following Riyadh's recent shift towards Turkey and Qatar. Now let's understand, Turkey, its leader Erdogan, has praised Hamas, has spoken about reconquering Jerusalem for the Muslim world, harkening back to the Ottoman Empire's control of the land of Israel, colonization of the land of Israel. That's real colonization for you. He's welcomed and embraced Hamas leaders. And in many ways, Turkey is becoming a growing problem and threat for Israel. Qatar, on the other hand, tries to fool the West into suggesting that it's some kind of, moderator between all the different sides. But really, it's funding and sympathizing with and giving fuel to Islamist, anti-Israel, anti-Western forces. Quote, we expect from anybody who wants normalization or peace with us that they not participate in efforts steered by forces or ideologies that want the opposite of peace, Netanyahu said at a press conference in response to a question by the Times of Israel. Normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia seemed to be a question of when, not if, before the October 7, 2023 invasion of southern Israel by Hamas and the subsequent war. Two Israeli ministers made unprecedented visits to the Desert Kingdom in the weeks before the attack, and the Biden house was pushing hard for a deal. Riyadh adopted a harder line on normalization during the war, insisting that Israel commit to Palestinian statehood, which Netanyahu opposes, rightly, by the way, and which the Israeli public is even less likely to accept in the wake of the Hamas attack. US President Trump repeatedly expressed hope that Riyadh would join the Abraham Accords, which normalized ties between Israel and several Arab nations in 2020, during the president's first term. After the October 2025 ceasefire, Trump reportedly told Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman that he expects him to move towards normalization with Israel now that the fighting was over. But Saudi Arabia has been pursuing a dramatic realignment in the Middle East in recent months, including heightening its rivalry with the United Arab Emirates, one of Israel's closest allies in the region. In December, Mohammed bin Salman signed a series of agreements with Qatari Sheikh Tamim Al Thani, and they discussed, among other things, deepening defense cooperation. Saudi Arabia is also reportedly in talks with Turkey, one of Israel's leading regional rivals, to join a mutual defense pact that includes Pakistan. But be clear, by the way, that when we think about normalization and all that, it's so important that you understand that for a lot of these countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, they're thinking entirely about their own interests here. It's not about, I don't think, some kind of grand ideological move to loving Israel. For them, it's strategic. They're thinking about Iran, they're thinking about other regional actors, about their relationship with also, developing their economy and Western relations. It's strategic for them. And that's why it's so important that Israel also think strategically and always maintain their own security and sovereignty and make decisions on that basis. That's Israel's duty. Article continues by saying that both Turkey and Qatar are mediators of the US-brokered Gaza ceasefire, and their leaders have forged close partnerships with Trump since his return to office. In the years before the war, Qatar provided hundreds of millions in dollars to stabilize Hamas-ruled Gaza. And as MBS has moved away from the UAE and toward Turkey and Qatar, Saudi media has also taken a hostile turn against Israel and Jews of late. There's been a clear Saudi shift of late in rhetoric, in heavily criticising Israel and in policy, especially in countering the UAE. This was said by Michael Makovsky, President and CEO of the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. Such efforts reject the legitimacy of the State of Israel and nurture all kinds of forces that attack the State of Israel, said Netanyahu at the Tuesday press conference. He went on to say he'd be happy to have a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia, provided they want normalization and peace with a secure and strong Israel. In December, Saudi Arabia's former intelligence chief said that Riyadh is currently not even entertaining the idea of normalization relations with Israel, and will only do so if Jerusalem begins acting like a normal country. Well, perhaps this is part of the problem. Perhaps this is part of the problem because a lot of this comes from theology, and they need to understand that the Jews are not a normal country, because if they want to treat Jews in Israel like a normal country, then they may end up deciding that they just want to conquer it and conquer the territory as part of the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam. But they need to understand that no, this is a divine nation and a divine holy land that's assigned to the Jewish people. And until you can get your head around that, you're going to continue to have problems with the Muslim world. This is theological at root. So what else do we see here? We see that in November, Trump was reportedly left disappointed and angry after a tense exchange with MBS over normalization with Israel during their White House meeting. Citing two senior American officials and an additional source familiar with the conversation, Channel 12 News said Trump was the one to raise the issue, urging the Crown Prince to move forward immediately. In response, bin Salman pushed back, saying that while he isn't against normalization, widespread anti-Israel sentiment in Saudi Arabia following the war in Gaza doesn't allow for the move at this time. In other words, yeah, as we expected, there are deep religious and cultural issues in the Muslim and Arab world, and maybe it's a bit risky for him to do this. The first Trump administration and its successor, the Biden administration, tried to persuade Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords, but those hopes were dashed. First by opposition from the Crown Prince's father, King Salman, during Trump's first term, and then by MBS himself, following the October 7th Hamas attack. Now, a few things that need to be said here is that, as I said before, Netanyahu and Israel have to prioritize their strategic interests, their security, and their sovereignty. That's point number one. And if that means they can't have normalization, fine. There should be no compromises that compromise any of that in order to gain that normalization. As for President Trump, yes, he achieved many great things, but sometimes it feels a little bit like he's just trying to get those agreements in place so he can checkbox, say, yep, it's done, see, all good. A bit like the Gaza board for peace. But if you don't deal with the ideological problems of Palestinianism, if you don't deal with the fact that for as long as you have Muslim Arab sovereignty within the borders of Israel, yes, that includes Gaza, history has shown us you're inevitably going to have problems. The same thing with the 12-day war in Iran. Many say, why did he tell Netanyahu to stop when Israel was going to pummel Iran's ballistic missiles, having dealt with the nuclear threat? He said, no, stop. But that was in some ways a shallow peace, a shallow ceasefire, because now Iran are trying to rebuild, even though, yes, the people are threatening them, but there's all these kind of risks of war, and Iran's going to hit back against Israel and American forces in the region if America strikes Iran. Would they have been able to do this if Israel had been able to continue and scale back the Iran's ballistic missile stockpiles? So science feels that Trump is trying to push things that may not really have enough of a foundation. So that's why I keep getting back to this message of we just have to do, as a Jewish people, Israel has to do what it needs to do for its own security, sovereignty, stability, and assert that proudly and confidently. I think also We have to start thinking about our identity and how we define ourselves. Because as I say, a lot of this, that MBS is saying his own people have a hostility to Israel. I think a lot of that is because they see it as like a kind of Western, alien, colonial, maybe even secular outpost. If we started to tap in more into our deeper Jewish identity and explain that we're here because of our religious destiny, our Torah destiny, that God gave this land to us, not international law or anything like that, I actually think that could influence a lot of people in the Middle East. So this is really important stuff. So I think it's so important to prioritize the two points here that I've always go back to, which is uncompromising on your security and starting to go deeper in how we define our identity and destiny, to invoke the name of God. And the great irony is that that's actually the two things that the Muslim and Arab world seem to understand. Uncompromising strength. In other words, they want the river to the sea, right? And invoking the name of God, Allahu Akbar, in everything they do. Those are the two things that Israel needs to do moving forward as well. Just hang on for a moment. After covering Israel for years, I've realised that most of the lies boil down to one simple tactic used by Israel's enemies from the very start: the deliberate reversal of cause and effect. And our new documentary exposes exactly how this works. Have a watch of our trailer for our new film called The Great Reversal, and you can watch it in full right now by clicking the link below in the video description. For decades, one idea has shaped how much of the world understands the Israel-Palestine conflict. Israel did something wrong, and the Palestinians simply resisted. Whether it's 1948 or the recent war in Gaza, the story is the same every time. Israel provokes, Palestinians resist. Israel oppresses, Palestinians fight back. This narrative dominates campuses, the media, and much of global politics. It feels familiar, it feels intuitive, and for many people, it feels true. But what if the sequence is backwards? What if the origin point and every major chapter that followed has been told in reverse? In the wars of 1948 and 67, in the collapse of Oslo, in the suicide bombings of the Intifada, in the rockets after Israel withdrew from Gaza, in the massacre of October 7th, and the global narrative that followed. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to expose the great lie that has reversed cause and effect, a narrative engineered to help the real aggressors erode Israel's legitimacy. We'll trace the conflict from its origins to the present day, revealing how at every stage the true sequence of events was inverted, how aggression was reframed as resistance, how defense was recast as provocation, and how a conflict rooted in hatred of Jews was deliberately twisted into a story that blames the Jews. Join us as we restore the story to the order in which it actually happened and uncover the truth hidden beneath a century of lies. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.